The morning sky over northern France hung low with fog, a pale, milky veil that blurred the sound of distant engines. On a quiet stretch of farmland near Saint-Omer, German soldiers looked up as the whine of a Merlin engine tore through the mist. A lone aircraft, trailing smoke, staggered across the horizon, its elliptical wings glinting faintly in the weak sunlight. The machine was fast, graceful even in distress, dancing on the edge of control. Then 'twas a sputter, a sudden drop. The Spitfire skimmed a hedgerow, struck the ground, and skidded across the damp earth before coming to rest in silence. Its pilot, dazed and bleeding, was pulled from the cockpit as Wehrmacht troops closed in, rifles ready, but faces filled with something else. Awe. The black cross of the Luftwaffe hadn't seen craftsmanship like this. Rivets flush, controls smooth, every line curved for speed. Mechanics gathered around, speaking in low tones. Within hours, orders came from higher command. The aircraft was to be recovered intact. As German trucks rolled in to secure the wreck, the story of the Spitfire began long before it ever faced the Luftwaffe. In the early 1930s, a quiet revolution was taking place in British aviation, led not by generals, but by engineers. Among them was a man named Reginald Joseph Mitchell, chief designer at the Supermarine Aviation Works in Southampton. Known for building sleek racing seaplanes for the Schneider Trophy competitions, Mitchell was obsessed with one thing: speed. His designs broke records across the Channel, and by 1931 he had created machines that flew faster than any military aircraft in the world. But Mitchell saw the storm coming. Across Europe, the old balance of power was shifting. In Germany, Adolf Hitler had seized control, and under Hermann Göring, a new air force, the Luftwaffe, was rising in defiance of the Versailles Treaty. By 1935, Göring boasted of an air armada designed for dominance. Modern monoplane fighters, like the Messerschmitt Bf 109 and Heinkel He 111, were rolling out of factories at unprecedented speed. Britain, still haunted by the losses of the Great War, was slower to react. The Royal Air Force relied on aging biplanes like the Gloucester Gladiator. But inside the Air Ministry, the need for a new generation of fighters had become urgent. The call went out for a high-speed, single-seat interceptor, capable of reaching 350 miles per hour and climbing fast enough to meet incoming bombers before they reached the coast. Mitchell answered with the prototype that would change history, the Supermarine Type 300, first flown in March 1936. It was unlike anything before it, an all-metal, low-wing monoplane with retractable landing gear and a powerful Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. Its elliptical wings reduced drag, allowing unmatched agility and speed. When the Air Ministry saw it, they knew Britain had found its defender. The aircraft was christened the Spitfire, a name that sounded just right, as one official said. By the outbreak of war in September 1939, fewer than 400 Spitfires had been delivered. But the design was evolving fast. British factories raced to produce more, while new variants increased speed, firepower, and reliability. Across the Channel, the Luftwaffe's pilots were already battle-hardened, veterans of Spain and Poland, and they carried confidence in their machines. Then came May 1940. France fell. The German blitzkrieg swept across Europe, leaving British and French air units retreating in chaos. The Luftwaffe ruled the skies with sheer numbers and experience. Yet in those chaotic weeks of defeat, British pilots in their Spitfires and Hurricanes proved something astonishing. The new British fighter could turn tighter, climb faster, and strike harder than almost anything Germany could field. It was only a matter of time before one of those machines, damaged, not destroyed, would fall into German hands. The first opportunity came sooner than anyone expected. During the Battle of France, several RAF squadrons operating from temporary French airfields were overwhelmed by Luftwaffe raids. In the confusion of retreat, a handful of British fighters were forced down, some out of fuel, others crippled by ground fire or mechanical failure. Among them, in May 1940, near Waterloo and Calais, the Germans recovered their first largely intact Supermarine Spitfires. The Luftwaffe immediately recognized the value of these finds. Every undamaged component, from the Merlin engine to the oxygen system, was carefully catalogued and crated. These precious prizes were transported by rail to Rechlin, the Luftwaffe's top-secret test center north of Berlin, the German equivalent of Britain's Farnborough. Here, under strict supervision, captured Allied aircraft were examined, rebuilt, and flown by the Reich's most skilled test pilots. At Rechlin, engineers dismantled the Spitfire like archaeologists studying a relic from another world. They marveled at its precision. The thin skin of the wings, the flush riveting, the subtle twist along the leading edge that gave it such effortless control in tight turns. Compared to the Bf-109E, the Spitfire felt alive, more responsive, more forgiving. Even the cockpit layout impressed them. Simple, efficient, built for instinctive flying rather than procedure. But admiration soon mixed with disbelief. On paper, the Merlin engine's rated output seemed ordinary. Just over 1,000 horsepower, far below the DB601 of the Messerschmitt. Yet in practice, the British power plant produced smoother acceleration and sustained high performance at altitude. The German engineers couldn't quite explain it. The magic, they realized, wasn't in one feature. It was in the harmony of all of them. Among those assigned to the testing program were some of Germany's finest pilots. Captain Hans Werner Lerche, a veteran Luftwaffe test pilot who would later fly nearly every major Allied type, described his first encounter with the Spitfire as a revelation. He noted that its control harmony, the balance between rudder, aileron, and elevator, was unmatched. The aircraft, he wrote, felt like an extension of the pilot's body. As word spread through the Luftwaffe's technical branches, excitement turned to unease. The Spitfire was not simply a good fighter. It was a benchmark. For years, the Germans had assumed their engineering superiority was unquestionable. Now, in the hangars of Rechlin, that confidence began to waver. By the end of 1940, German intelligence had compiled a full dossier on the Spitfire's capabilities, its weaknesses, strengths, and potential upgrades. From a purely technological standpoint, the Supermarine Spitfire represented a leap forward that even the Germans had not anticipated. The aircraft's most defining feature, its elliptical wings, had been born not from style, but from mathematics. Designed to provide the thinnest possible airfoil with the least drag, the wings distributed lift evenly across their span. This allowed the Spitfire to achieve remarkable agility at both low and high speeds. At a time when most fighters stiffened or lost control in sharp turns, the Spitfire held its grace, a dancer where others were wrestlers. To the engineers at Rechlin, the shape was almost alien. German design favored sharp, angular geometry, but the British curve proved more efficient in reducing induced drag and improving roll rate. Every rivet, every line, seemed tuned toward aerodynamic purity. When test pilots began flying the captured model, typically an early Mk1 or Mk2 variant, they recorded turn rates that left the Bf-109 trailing by precious seconds. The Merlin third engine, built by Rolls-Royce, delivered 1,030 horsepower at 16,000 feet and maintained smooth performance even under heavy G-forces. Combined with a constant speed propeller and advanced supercharger, it provided unmatched climb and acceleration. But technology alone cannot tell a full story. The Spitfire's true brilliance revealed itself in human hands. When German test pilots first took it aloft, their reactions bordered on disbelief. Captain Hans Werner Lerche, tasked with evaluating the aircraft, later described it as a pilot's airplane in the truest sense. He found that it responded not just to control inputs, but to intention, almost anticipating what the pilot wanted before the movement began. Even Hannah Reitsch, the Luftwaffe's most famous female test pilot and one of the few to fly captured Allied aircraft, remarked privately on the Spitfire's soulful nature. She noted that where the Messerschmitt demanded discipline, the Spitfire offered trust. Its controls light, balanced, and fluid. The sense of connection between machine and pilot was immediate. The Luftwaffe's test reports became increasingly detailed. Engineers logged climb rates of over 2,500 feet per minute, a top speed exceeding 360 miles per hour, and exceptional stability in dives. But the most striking comment appeared repeatedly in handwritten margins. Harmonisch. Harmonious. For a force that prided itself on engineering mastery, this word carried weight. It meant that the British had achieved something intangible, a perfection of balance that no instrument could measure. At Rechlin, admiration turned quietly into unease. For the first time, the Luftwaffe understood that their opponent's strength in the air was not merely numerical or strategic. It was built into the very DNA of their machines. When compared directly to the Messerschmitt, Bf 109, the Spitfire revealed both nations' distinct philosophies of air combat. The German fighter was built for aggression, compact, angular, and brutally efficient. It climbed faster in short bursts and delivered heavier cannon fire. But it was unforgiving. Its narrow undercarriage made takeoffs and landings perilous. Its cockpit was cramped, its range limited. The Spitfire, by contrast, was built for endurance and elegance. It turned tighter, felt lighter, and remained stable at the edge of a stall. In a duel between equals, victory often belonged not to the more powerful aircraft, but to the one that forgave human error. By 1941, as new variants like the Fu-190A entered Luftwaffe service, the contrast deepened. The Focke-Wulf was a technological monster, faster, tougher, with a roll rate unmatched at low altitudes. But when German pilots who had flown both aircraft compared notes, the consensus was clear. The Spitfire, though less heavily armed, possessed an agility that defied logic. In sustained turns or dogfights above 15,000 feet, the British machine still held an edge. At the leadership level, these findings reached Hermann Göring's staff through detailed Rechlin reports. The intelligence summaries were clinical. The Spitfire's strengths were precision manufacturing, refined aerodynamics, and power-to-weight balance. Yet the tone behind the numbers told another story, one of surprise and discomfort. Göring, proud of German technical dominance, dismissed some of the conclusions outright. But among his senior engineers, the truth was evident. The British had mastered the art of balance. Inside the Technisches Amt, the Luftwaffe's technical office, quiet discussions began about whether future German fighters should emulate aspects of the Spitfire's design. Elliptical wings were considered but rejected as too complex and labor-intensive for mass production. Efficiency bowed to speed. The Luftwaffe sought immediate results, more armor, more firepower, more horsepower, but not the elusive harmony the Spitfire embodied. Psychologically, the captured aircraft left a deep mark. German test pilots respected it, even loved it, but never quite accepted it. To admire an enemy's weapon was to admit vulnerability, and that ran against the culture of superiority cultivated within the Reich. Still, in private notes and flight logs, their admiration slipped through. One pilot described the Spitfire as a thoroughbred horse, another as the most honest machine I have ever flown. In the skies over Europe, that honesty mattered. The Luftwaffe would soon face thousands of these honest machines, flown by pilots who trusted them completely. The admiration, recorded in German hangars, would soon collide with brutal reality when the Vb Spitfire met its captors again, this time in battle. At Rechlin, the Spitfire was treated like a captured treasure. Over weeks, German mechanics worked meticulously to restore it to flight condition, replacing damaged control surfaces and calibrating the Merlin engine with tools never meant for British tolerances. When at last the aircraft stood ready, gleaming under the cold light of a Brandenburg morning, a quiet tension filled the airfield. Captain Hans Werner Lersche was the first to take it up. His orders were simple: push it to its limits and record everything. As the Merlin roared to life, the sound was unlike any German engine. Deeper, smoother, almost melodic. The Spitfire rolled down the runway, lifted cleanly, and climbed with surprising eagerness. Lerche's notes from that flight remain among the most revealing in wartime aviation history. He described how, at full throttle, the Spitfire felt completely neutral. The controls light, perfectly balanced. In tight turns, it refused to stall. Even at extreme bank angles, the aircraft responded predictably, almost intuitively. German engineers, accustomed to the harsh feedback of the Bf-109, were stunned. The aircraft could be flown at the edge of its envelope with ease, a trait that made British pilots both fearless and precise. Subsequent tests explored every limit: high-altitude climbs, dive recovery, roll rate, G-load tolerance. Each time, the Spitfire exceeded expectations. When compared side by side with the Messerschmitt Bf-109E, the British fighter outturned it by a wide margin and recovered from dives faster due to its cleaner aerodynamics. Only in raw climb rate did the Bf-109 hold a slight edge, but even then, the Spitfire's superior control at altitude made it more lethal in a fight that twisted and spiraled above the clouds. When the FW-190A arrived for testing in 1941, engineers repeated the trials. The German radial engine fighter was faster in a straight line, but pilots admitted privately that the Spitfire still felt right. More obedient, less mechanical. In one flight, a German pilot deliberately forced the Spitfire into a violent spin, expecting it to fall into unrecoverable rotation. Instead, the aircraft stabilized itself after a few turns, responding calmly to minor corrections. Shock spread through the test group. Machines, they said, were not supposed to behave like this. Back on the ground, engineers pored over the control linkages and flight surfaces, searching for a hidden trick, some mechanical secret to explain the harmony they had witnessed. But there was none. The genius of the Spitfire lay not in innovation alone, but in balance, a perfect confluence of design, weight, and responsiveness. As one Luftwaffe report summarized with understated awe, "No aircraft we possess combines so many favorable qualities in one frame." Yet the lesson they drew from that discovery would prove deeply flawed. The data gathered from Rechlin filtered quickly into the Technisches Amt, shaping the Luftwaffe's next generation of fighter designs. Engineers studying the Spitfire's fluid control surfaces and thin elliptical wing drew direct comparisons to German concepts already in development. Though they dismissed copying the exact wing design, too difficult, too labor-intensive, the lessons were clear: lighter control forces, smoother transitions, and aerodynamic cleanliness could decide a dogfight as surely as horsepower. By 1942, subtle echoes of that realization appeared in German fighters like the Bf-109G Gustav and the long-nosed FW-190D Dora. Both sought to bridge agility with raw power. The FW-190D, with its lengthened fuselage and refined aerodynamics, was in many ways Germany's answer to the Spitfire MiG-9, a response to an aircraft they had studied, envied, and misunderstood. The Luftwaffe learned that speed and climb rate alone could not guarantee victory if an aircraft lacked harmony between pilot and machine. But their fixation on numbers, rate of roll, engine output, altitude ceilings, blinded them to what made the Spitfire invincible in the hands of its pilots. While German engineers dissected machinery, the Royal Air Force perfected people. In Britain, Fighter Command, under Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, had built a system that turned young recruits into masters of the air. The British didn't just train pilots, they trained instincts. Every man who sat in a Spitfire's cockpit understood not only how to fly, but how to think within its rhythm. Their coordination with radar control, ground intercept systems, and squadron tactics transformed each sortie into a precise, living network. The Luftwaffe never... The results from Rechlin were both illuminating and unsettling. On paper, the Spitfire's design had exposed no revolutionary secrets, no new material, no radical technology, no hidden weapon. Yet the German engineers and pilots who tested it could not deny its perfection in balance. They respected it privately, but in official reports, pride tempered honesty. The Luftwaffe could not openly concede that Britain, the island nation they had failed to subdue, had built a fighter superior in feel and finesse. As 1941 unfolded, that denial began to cost them. In the skies over the Channel and North Africa, the Spitfire's evolving variants began to dominate. The Spitfire Mk with its two-stage supercharged Merlin 45 engine, pushed performance beyond what the Rechlin-tested Mk1 had ever achieved. It climbed faster, fought higher, and matched the FW-190 in everything but straight-line speed. German intelligence officers, reviewing air combat reports, were baffled. They had studied the Spitfire exhaustively. They knew its weaknesses. Yet, somehow, each new version erased the gaps. Field units demanded urgent upgrades to the Bf-109F and G series, adding firepower and power at the expense of handling. The Luftwaffe's engineers chased numbers again: engine boost, cannon, caliber, rate of climb. But they never rediscovered the elusive harmony they had witnessed in that captured Spitfire. Among test pilots, respect remained mixed with disbelief. Captain Lurch continued to fly captured Allied aircraft throughout the war, recording over 100 types, but he never forgot the Spitfire. His later memoirs acknowledged its unmatched stability and control. Others spoke in quieter tones, admiration not only for the aircraft, but for what it represented. Within the Luftwaffe's inner circles, that admiration was often disguised as critique. Reports described the Spitfire as too delicate for field use, or mechanically inefficient for mass production. These were excuses, not analyses, the kind used when pride stands in the way of truth. By the end of 1941, as the air war intensified, the Spitfire was no longer just a British fighter. It had become a benchmark of what fighter aviation could be. And for every captured example examined in Germany, dozens more flew freely above occupied Europe, carrying a defiance that no report could quantify. As the war dragged on, more Spitfires fell into German hands, newer, faster, and deadlier versions than the early Mk1 that had astonished Rechlin. In 1942, Luftwaffe units operating in northern France captured an almost intact Spitfire Mk Vb near Calais. Later, in 1943, another Mk9, the RAF's answer to the formidable FW-190, was recovered after a forced landing in Norway. Each was quickly sent to Germany for renewed evaluation. The tests confirmed what the Luftwaffe already feared. The Spitfire was evolving faster than their ability to respond. The Mk9, with its two-stage supercharged Merlin 61 engine, could now match or exceed the FW-190A in almost every aspect of performance: speed, climb, and altitude handling. Even when German engineers introduced upgrades to their own fighters, the RAF countered within months. It was a duel of design philosophy, and Britons had proven more adaptable. Meanwhile, the Luftwaffe's resources were being pulled eastward. Operation Barbarossa, launched in June 1941, consumed aircraft, fuel, and men at an unsustainable rate. The elite fighter groups that once dominated the Western Front were now scattered across the vast skies of the Soviet Union. Training hours. For new pilots were slashed. Combat veterans were irreplaceable. When they returned to face the RAF and, later, the USAAF, they found the Spitfire stronger than ever, refined, reliable, and now joined by hundreds of American escorts. By 1943, the balance had shifted irreversibly. German airfields faced daily raids, their once mighty fighter corps stretched to exhaustion. The lessons from Rechlin, the smooth control, the balanced design, had long been buried under layers of industrial pressure and wartime desperation. The Luftwaffe chased numbers. The RAF pursued refinement. The Spitfire, born in quiet. In the end, the Spitfire was never just an aircraft. It was a declaration, forged in aluminum and sweat, that freedom would not yield to tyranny. For Britain, it became the nation's beating heart in the sky, its elliptical wings carving defiance into the clouds over Kent, Dieppe, and Normandy. At Rechlin, German test pilots studied the machine with reverence they could never publicly express. They saw in it something they could not replicate. Not merely the balance of control surfaces or the power of a Merlin engine, but the philosophy behind it. The Spitfire was not built for conquest. It was built to defend, to endure, and to outlast fear itself. Even as the Luftwaffe's finest flew it, their admiration was a quiet confession. They understood, perhaps too late, that wars are not won by steel alone, but by spirit, by the will of those who refuse to surrender. By the time the Third Reich collapsed, thousands of Spitfires had taken to the skies. Newer marks, faster, deadlier, but always with the same soul. Its song of freedom echoed far beyond the smoke of Europe. For generations to come, it would stand as proof that when courage and engineering unite, even the darkest skies can be turned toward the light. The Spitfire was never captured, not really. Its spirit remained unbroken.